Welcome to Beyond the Backlog. I'm Nick.
And I'm Zack.
And today we're going to do a quick little one for you. We're not going to get too in-depth on these games, but we're going to do a little blurbs about our 10 favorite games each.
Yeah, we're going to try and keep it quick, considering more than half of mine is Mario and Zelda. We've already done top 10 Mario and Zelda games. Yeah. Spoilers.
It's more of an overarching thing for maybe coming back to it later, seeing how our opinions might have changed. But I know, at least in my experience, my top 5 has been pretty well the same for a good long while.
I was going to say, a lot of mine would fall into that games that helped shape who you are as a gamer now, or the ones, for me specifically, what stands out is if I finish a game and I want to keep playing, I know that I had something special. And my first example of that was Super Mario Odyssey. So that's my number 10. But again, not going to get too far into it. Just if you like 3D platforming and you just have this, want to be able to explore worlds in a way, whatever way you see fit. I think the options that Odyssey has for traversal and navigation and just movement is just so slick.
It's the movement. The movement's so good. My number 10 is going to be FromSoft. Going to show up a couple times. Dark Souls 3 specifically. I'm not the biggest fan of Dark Souls 1. I was more of a Demon Souls guy than a Dark Souls guy, but Dark Souls 3 kind of hit it just right for me. And it's the classic get good game. It's great. The DLC is a lot of fun. The weapons are cool. It streamlined some of the approaches because Demon Souls, Dark Souls can get a little clunky. Not my favorite FromSoft game. You'll see that in a bit, but we'll go from there. I will just say as well, my number 9 was Mario Odyssey. So, similar top 10. A little bit. For me, it's the movement. It's the 3D. It's the best 3D Mario game.
Yeah, we ironically started off very similar, but the last one that I think we are going to share is my number 9, and that is my first Zelda game on the list, and that is Tears of the Kingdom. So this is also the most recent game, I think, on either of our lists. And
I think so, by a couple months. Tears of the Kingdom comes in at number 8 on my list.
Yeah, so for me, number 9. And I think what stood out to about this one was that everything we loved about Breath of the Wild is just vamped up to the extreme, and it is just so carefully designed. And again, that same sense of I can move from point A to point B in so many ways, and it's just so much option and freedom. And I think instead of Odyssey and Breath of the Wild kind of being the two big kingpins of Switch, I think Tears of the Kingdom did dethrone Breath of the Wild.
It's one of those interesting scenarios where the sequel almost hurts the first game in the series.
Because I don't know about you, but I probably would have put Breath of the Wild in this spot.
Yeah, I remember the first list that we did was maybe 4 or 5 years ago-ish. And we do top 20s. And Breath of the Wild, I believe, was top 10, if not top 15. And now it's just nowhere to be found because Tears of the Kingdom, in both of our minds, just kind of did what Breath of the Wild did, but better. And it came out far enough away from each other that you didn't have the issue of, well, I just played Breath of the Wild and now it's kind of the same thing. We have the mindset of, well, it's kind of like Breath of the Wild, but it's also better.
And the new mechanics that they added in, well, also, it wasn't like a lot of sequels where it's you have the same abilities plus more. This was we're going to scrap what we did in the last game and keep that as an exclusive feature, which I think is just epic.
Yeah.
Did you have any more that you wanted to say about Tears of the Kingdom?
Just bring back dungeons.
Oh, yeah, some good old classics.
It's the only critique I ever have with it, but it was more fleshed out than Breath of the Wild was. Breath of the Wild was very atmospheric. And this one kind of is. It lost a little bit of the atmosphere, but there was more to do. It didn't feel as empty, and I think that was a good thing.
I think going into Death Mountain and underground and being in the depths, in the darkness, doing the fire temple, that was awesome.
Yes.
Just the water temple being just a floating platform in the sky. And I'm I could just fall off and then... But it's almost pointless because I can just teleport back there anyway.
Yeah, some water temple.
I'm something about that, it just kind of loses some of the appeal. But either way, fantastic game. Easily goes into both of our top 10s. Now is when we're going to start splitting ways a little bit. So my number 8 is Stray, which if you watch our indie top 10, that was my favorite indie game. And if you could just pick apart pieces of my personality, that's a nice alliteration, and stitch them together, I feel like Stray is exactly what you'd get from my imagination. We got cats running around some cool dystopian world, almost like a creepy, like tense thriller elements to it. But at the end of the day, you just get to be a cat and do cat things, and that is what I want from the game. I honestly debated between this or Maneater, which is a game where you play as shark and just do shark things. And both of them just kind of hit that particular niche of my two favorite animals, and just getting to play as them in a video game, kind of like without feeling, I don't know, it's like video game-y, but also true to the animals themselves. Anyway.
My number 7 coming up just had DLC released a little while back. I'm back to being bad at the game, so I haven't beat it yet. That's going to be Elden Ring.
So this is your favorite FromSoft game?
This is my favorite FromSoft game. Might be my favorite open world game. Looking at the rest of the list looks to be the case. It, I think, now becomes the quintessential FromSoft experience. Because it just has the open world aspect. It lets you do a couple different things. It lets you go at your own pace. Explore a little bit more. You don't get quite as bottlenecked if you're not good enough to beat a certain style of boss.
I'm noticing there's definitely some propinquity for choice in your top list here so far.
Yeah. No, it's great. I'm not as much of an open world guy as something like this leads you to believe, but when it hits it well, because you have to be able to explore and find things, not just explore and find nothing.
I mean, same with me in like RPGs. Just I love getting into one. It just takes a lot to get me into one.
Yeah.
But speaking of big epic RPGs, Rock Band 4 has none of that. So Rock Band 4 is my number 6.
Great game.
I think the reason I went with Rock Band 4 is because it is still active. Like, I have probably arguably put as many hours into 2 as I did into 4. But 4 was not the reason I got a PS4, but it's the only reason I've ever had 4 people playing my PS4 at any given time. And I've had that happen multiple times. It's just one of those, a couple of times a year, I just get people together to play Rock Band, even when I am not actively like seeking out people to play with. I am more than happy to just spend a couple hours in there because I have hundreds of songs downloaded. I'm never going to run out of things to do in that game. So I think the reason I put it up here is not my 6, it's my 7. I lied. And the reason I put it up at my number 7 here is strictly because it is kind of my forever game. It's just one that I'm never going to get bored of, and I'm always going to have something to do in.
If it keeps going, it's just a great one. The only reason it doesn't hit a list of mine is I don't own the game. I just play yours. Mm-hmm. Right? Because that's what it is. A couple times a year, you do a big Rock Band day. You almost want to just have a party if you had more space to just really go for it. But great game.
And it, as we talked about in our Guitar Hero Rock Band episode, it also just really shaped my music tastes, and so much good has come out of Rock Band.
100%. We're going to get into my, I don't want to call it a party game, but you've got Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Any of the Smash Bros. Could have realistically been on the list. If it wasn't this, it would have been the Wii U one. But it's one of those things where, to me, each game kind of just gets a little bit better, a little bit more fun. And Ultimate just is the magnum opus, I think, of the Smash Bros. Series. You have all the characters. You have really easy to do controls, right? Melee now at this point is notoriously difficult to play. Brawl is a little bit too floaty and too like top tier, bottom tier. Mm-hmm. Whereas with Ultimate, it feels the best. Most of my friends really got into it from like a semi-competitive perspective. So we would just run Smash Bros. Nights, 1v1s, No items, Final Destination. Right, your classic.
Yeah, Ultimate was the first one I actually picked up and like ran away with in a non-casual party sense. Yeah, because before Ultimate, I was very much just beating the heck out of CPUs with items on wild, wacky terrain.
Yeah, Pokeballs only.
Yeah.
Then you just see what happens.
But Ultimate actually made me learn how to play so I could play with a group of friends that all were like focused and dedicated on the game.
Yeah, it's kind of like your Rock Band where a couple times a year, I think at this point, we'll break it out at some type of get-together, play a couple hours, and then just be set. I think my last run was New Year's.
And when I break it out, I do a smash down. I think that's my favorite feature of this particular game is if you want like a 2 to 3 hour session, you can do smash down and set it to like 2-3 stocks and just play through the entire list of characters.
Yeah, I used to do that with old roommates because then you go through the entire thing and then you get deeper and deeper into your champ pool and like, okay, well, my cousin's very good at these games, but he plays like 3 characters. That just makes it easier because he's still got the mechanics down, but he doesn't know the characters.
Yeah, and that's where I would usually go for a character that I knew our best player was good with because he had like 5 that he could just wipe the floor with. And I was good with maybe 10 characters. I would say I had above the rest, but I never played them all 10 very consistently. So nobody wanted to like steal them from me. But anyway, my number 6 is my favorite Mario game. Second one to make the list, and that is Super Mario World.
That feels a little low.
Feels low. And it was, honestly, I was debating about it being on number 5, maybe even number 4 on this list. But I think, quite literally, as you were saying before this, I think my number 8 and up, you could probably swap around most of the order. And I'm like, these are just my solid, consistent, I know these are on my favorite games list. And then anything after that, so like 9 and 10 even on this list, I'm like, depending on the day, you might get a different response.
Yeah, I could see that.
But Super Mario World is always going to be, or at least until something better comes out, is going to be my favorite Mario game. It just nailed the 2D style that the original NES games are going for.
Yeah.
Except expanded on it in a way where it's like the only way they could have pumped it full of all these features was to put it on new hardware. And as far as I'm aware, the story kind of goes that the Super Nintendo was created to do the things that they wanted to do in Super Mario World. And like such as manipulating the size of sprites or things like that, like parallax scrolling and a little hint of Mode 7 in there.
Yeah.
So it was just a groundbreaking landmark title that just brought in this second wave of games. It kind of proved that home consoles weren't just going to be a 1-decade one-off thing. And I think it was also the first video game I remember playing and I remember beating. So good luck trying to convince me that it's not my favorite.
Exactly. No, I've got that coming up on the list as well. And it's just one of those, Mario World is great, but to me, I had a couple above that. But we'll get into top 5 now. These are like the creme de la creme. My top 5, I don't know about yours. My top 5 hasn't moved in like years. So it's very much 6 to 10 is like kind of like the new era, whereas 1 to 5 is all nostalgia.
I would say the only thing in my top 5 that's moved, like the last time it moved was 2016.
Yeah. My number 5 is BioShock. It is my favorite non-Nintendo adjacent IP. My favorite non-Nintendo game. And it's just one of those, your first experience of it is what does it, right? Like going through and having this cool story, having it be not quite combat focused, but combat enough just to keep you kind of engaged.
It's like a story, but with resistance.
Yeah. And then the time frame is cool. Like alt history 1950s is really cool. And seeing as the only other thing that I experienced around that time frame was like a post-apocalyptic Fallout type of thing, I preferred this style better. The twists that they have in it, with Andrew Ryan and everything. It's a good enough game that you forget its flaws.
Would you kindly explain in more detail?
No. But the critiques in it, I get. The second half of the game kind of just happens.
Honestly, I think this might be a case where having a BioShock 2 just kind of muddies the end of BioShock 1, because it's like, we didn't need more of BioShock 1. We essentially got another BioShock 1.
Exactly. And then a third BioShock 1, but it had a different...
But the third BioShock it feels very different.
Exactly. That's kind of the main thing. But it's one that I always like to come back to, just as like a feel-good one. I don't tend to go through games multiple times in a shorter time span. I like to take my time and then just stop, wait 5-10 years even, and then go back to it. But BioShock is one that I just go back to, and I would love to do like a deeper dive into the game itself, because there's a lot to it.
All right. So I think the more I'm staring at my top 5, the more I'm realizing the connection that they have and why Super Mario World got the boot down to number 6. And that's because the last 3, or even like let's say the last 5 I talked about, I will pick up and play anytime, and I will pop them in for a little bit. The 5 above, I have played through and beaten 100% at least a dozen times each.
Okay.
Yeah. So, first off, number 5, The Legend of Zelda, A Link Between Worlds. So, I remember kind of falling out of favor with Nintendo for a couple years in the Wii U life cycle. And the last game I remember just really getting hyped up for and buying the day it came out, not on Wii U, but on the 3DS in 2013, Link Between Worlds. And it was so good that when I finished it, I started up the hero mode immediately and played it again. And it was so good that I almost wanted to play it a third time. But compared to anything lower on my list, the main difference I find is that even though it's a solid like dozen-hour commitment to go in, play through, because like there's like 11 dungeons in this game, like it's no chump change. And just the memories, the reminiscence of A Link to the Past, which is also another really good Zelda game, but obviously below A Link Between Worlds, and nobody should disagree with me on that.
Hey, opinions can be wrong.
Spoiler, maybe. This one is just always going to be my favorite handheld game. It depends on how we look at it, because there is another Zelda game that was a handheld game, but I'm going with the remaster on Switch, so don't hold me to it.
Okay.
So this was just like, if I think about me at age 19, this was what I cared about. This was me. This was half my personality, was wanting to be this big epic, like Legend of Zelda, like try harder here.
Yeah, fanboy.
Yeah. And if there was any, honestly, at again, most of my top 5, if I had the chance, I would absolutely speedrun any of them, because they are just so good for that.
My number 4 is going to be my favorite platformer. It's shocking, but not entirely so. That's Donkey Kong Country 2, Diddy's Kong Quest.
You know what? A lot of people agree with you.
Yeah. It's just surprising seeing it all just written out here, right? Especially side-scrolling. But like, I notoriously didn't really enjoy the first Donkey Kong Country. I don't know what it is. I think it just kind of feels like the graphics are a little weird. It looks like you have layers of animation.
I mean, I can understand that, but obviously at the time was a limitation of technology.
Yeah, it's just the weirdest thing, because even growing up, because we had these games when I was very young, right? Like, I remember getting Donkey Kong Country 3 for my birthday when I was like 4 or 5. But the second game always was just the one that I would go to. And I think it's part music. The music's just amazing in it. It's the environments. I think they're just really neat and different and cool. Dixie and Diddy Kong, to me, are the best Kongs to play as. They're the ones that move the best. They're the ones that respond the best. I've always found Donkey Kong and Kiddy Kong to be a little bit lacking in that. And when you mention speedrunning things, this would be one of the only ones that I think I would speedrun.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we want to do, right?
Yeah, it's a goal at some point.
The goal is to try and learn the speedrun.
Yeah, it's I've taken a look at it. It's a little bit rough.
Excellent.
Yeah, because let me tell you, this game's hard. I don't remember it being hard, but it was one of the first games that I beat. You'll see the first one later on in this list, but this is peak nostalgia that still holds up. Right, because when I think of something like a Mario Odyssey, like a Celeste, all those other games, Ori and the Blind Forest, like, they still have to beat nostalgia, and I don't think they do. And that's kind of the big thing with as we get further up on this list, right?
You know what? I'm going to have to agree with you, because I think the reason Until Dawn stays at number 4 is that it just can't beat the nostalgia I have for the 3 above it. Mm-hmm. So Until Dawn is... I think the reason, it was like the first game I got on any Sony hardware. Prior to seeing the trailer for Until Dawn, I was like, I'm going to ride it out with the Wii U, and we're just going to pray for the best. And I didn't really have any other plans beyond that. Like, I didn't collect things on Steam. But I saw the trailer for Until Dawn, and if you don't know this about me, I love horror movies. And I do like walking sim type games or like choose your own adventure type games, but just what appealed to me is that I got to play a horror movie and I got to control it. And some of the unique features of the PlayStation 4 controller made it in, like the touchpad being used to like flick a light or like turn pages in a book or something. So some really neat little tidbits there. But at the end of the day, you can play as 8 different characters, and any of these 8 characters can live or die depending on your choices. And that alone was enough to hook me in and get its teeth right into my brain. And at this point, it has become a customary tradition. Every Halloween time, I sit down and do a playthrough of Until Dawn, because it only takes 5 to 6 hours.
Yeah, you do it in a day.
But it's so good that I've literally played it through well over 10 times. Like, I have the platinum trophy for seeing every single possible outcome of every scenario at this point. And you would think, okay, so you know everything. You wouldn't play it again after that, would you? Well, joke's on you. I have.
Is there enough of a choose your own adventure aspect to keep it fresh as well? Or is it just a feel good kind of Halloween? Let's go.
Strange, because part of it is knowing every single outcome. Mm-hmm. And once you know every outcome, it becomes less of a challenge of how do I keep them alive and more of a, like, trying to remember almost like note for note what happens and where the scares are. So it's like you feel like you're the game's master and you're staying ahead of things.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And when something occurs and you're like, wait, what? You almost have that moment of like, I feel like I'm still learning about this game. There's still so much to, so maybe I've just played it too much and it's Stockholm Syndrome to me at this point, but I think it's worth replaying over and over.
Yeah. Hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Absolutely.
We're getting into top 3 here. My number 3, like most, kids that were born in the 90s, I'm a Pokemon guy. My favorite growing up was always Pokemon Silver. So when they made a better Pokemon Silver, I liked that too. It's Pokemon Soul Silver, which is just Pokemon Silver, but better.
Hey, on my honorable mentions, I put Pokemon Crystal.
Yeah.
Gen 2, baby.
Can't beat Pokemon. But Gen 2 is my favorite one, but with the Gen 4 mechanics.
I see. Yeah, because you put Gen 4 as your favorite just generation of Pokemon.
Yes, which is funny because I hate the Gen 4 games. I don't like Diamond or Pearl too much. But Soul Silver, I think, is the perfect one. I prefer longer games. I like when Pokemon games are longer. So kind of combining everything together. It's the closest I ever got to really like completing the Pokedex. Mm-hmm. Which is funny because you need a whole bunch of extra help to do it in Soul Silver.
Yeah, I was going to say the only reason I ever got close to a completed Pokedex was because it was so old of a game in Crystal.
Right, that you just need a couple of them and then you're pretty well set.
So I think I had everything except like Mewtwo, Mew, and Celebi.
Mm-hmm. But this, like the day-night mechanic is really cool. I like a lot of the Pokemon that are in around this time. It was just before I kind of felt they jumped the shark in terms of designs of them. Not that Pokemon designs have ever been amazing, but once you kind of meld a little bit too much with real world, you kind of lose me a little bit.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. You get a little bit too anthropomorphic, and I'm like, now let's take a step back here. But the fact that you get kind of 2 games within one, right? You do your 8 gym leaders, you beat the Elite Four, and then you can go into Kanto. At the time was cool when I was a kid playing Silver, and it's even better with Soul Silver because when you beat them, you can challenge them again and they're much stronger. Then you do the whole red thing. That's pretty great. I've got like 400 hours in this game on my one file.
I say one thing I love about Gen 2 is that there is stuff to do right up until like there's opponents up to level 80.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you can conceivably get a level 100 just through actually playing the game.
Mm-hmm. And they do have like post-game challenges in other games, but it doesn't feel as like natural.
Yeah, it's not the same.
Because in Gen 2, like say you started with a party, by like the second or third gym, you have a pretty full party. If you train those exact same guys all the way through 2 full regions, and you're already going to be in that level range where you're ready to take on the final challenge.
Yeah.
So it just paces itself really well.
Exactly. Yeah, it's great pace. I know especially some Nuzlockers don't really like Gen 2, which I kind of get. But just as casual playthroughs, I think it's just a really fun time.
Oh, yeah. All right. My number 3, Luigi's Mansion. Maybe not as scary as Until Dawn, as somebody who, loves his horror. But I think the reason this one stands out is the nostalgia factor. Because yet again, this is a case where I didn't have a GameCube when it came out, and I was over at my friends, and we would play Animal Crossing, Smash Melee, and then he would let me play Luigi's Mansion when he had gone to sleep after. So my memories of Luigi's Mansion were trying to be dreadfully quiet in a pitch black room and trying to like sneak around. So those ghosts popping up out of furniture when I was like 10 years old got me.
Spooky.
Like it was spooky. Like everything I love about horror is done to a very kid-friendly way in Luigi's Mansion. I think being this weird spin-off, but also mainline adventure in a not Mario, but still Mario universe, it really showed me that I can kind of move beyond this bubble of Pokemon, Mario, Zelda that I have.
Yeah.
And it was one of the first games that really got me away from just, here's the games I own. I had like this, like 24 games that I played from when I was like 3 until 13. And this was one of the first ones that stood out to me outside of that core group of like 24 games there. And because of that, it is my number 3 game. The only 2 above are, spoiler alert, 2 of those 24 games that I played endlessly in my childhood.
I didn't realize Luigi's Mansion was as short as it was because it just feels much longer.
Well, and that's yet another case of what really draws me in is an arcadey experience, but that doesn't get cut short when you like run out of 3 lives or something. Like I want an arcade experience, but that's like 2 hours long, and then is over and done.
See, and I like some type of open worldy thing, but a lot of story building. So I had Luigi's Mansion. I think it just dropped out of the top 20 for me, but the fact that each ghost has its own story, even just those little blurbs, I used to sit there and just read them and just learn about them, right?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Like I want to do, like if I was to pick any game to do like a full retrospective, like 50-minute to an hour long video documenting every little tidbit of detail as to why I love it, Luigi's Mansion would be one of my top picks.
Yeah. No, it's a great one. I still chase it when it's like the second or the third Luigi's Mansion. They're good. It doesn't hit quite the same, right? But we'll move on to my number 2. I am a bit of a tactical RPG guy, but it's kind of just Fire Emblem. My number 2 is Fire Emblem Blazing Sword. It's the first one that came out in North America, first Western release. It's the Lyn one, the Eliwood, the Hector. This was my first experience with the series and kind of with the genre. It was that and Final Fantasy Tactics Advance.
Mm-hmm. Another really good one.
Another really good one, but I just couldn't get into it quite the same. And I think it's just from a character perspective, right? I liked reading. I liked having everything like that, or kind of an English background, right? So having characters with support conversations and having to really sit and think and figure out what all my moves were, because if a character died, they were gone forever. So I had to really plan out where the enemy would move to, where I would move to, stack everything where they need to go. It's one of the longer games in the series too. The Hector mode's like 36 chapters and most of them top out around 30.
No, like going that far back, are there some like mainstay features that are missing?
To be entirely honest, all of the things that are added into the later games, I tend not to do.
Yeah.
So like it's
but
before,
it's like it still has like the combat triangle and things like that.
Yeah, it still has the combat triangle. It still has the anima triangle as well. It doesn't have pairing, right? Because pairing is more of a recent thing. You would have your support conversations by standing next to the people, but you only had a certain amount. So your replay value was, well, I want to see what all of these characters' stories are. So I've got to play and keep Lyn next to Eliwood, so I can get them up to S rank or A rank to see what they do. And I got to do the same for Hector and Eliwood, but I can't do them both in the same game, so I got to like go through it again and again. But it has its own kind of built-in challenges too, right? You can pick worse characters that have better stat growth, so it's a little bit harder at the beginning, but pays off at the end. Because it's all kind of like RNG based off of level, you could train an ally and then they just kind of suck, which is just really cool from a replay perspective. The story is really great. It has a really nice way of doing the tutorial. So like Lyn's chapters, there's 10 chapters, is a tutorial. Mm-hmm. So it teaches you about weather, about the weapon triangle, about recruitment, about upgrading, class changing, all of that. And then Eliwood's story is like the real story of the game. But then if you played Lyn's mode, you would have the stats that you leveled up the characters with from there. Otherwise, they would just like boost them up to a certain amount. So it was really neat to do that. And then most of the Fire Emblems are good, but this one, I think just because it was first and it was a well-made game with your GBA graphics, really just stands out to me still.
Yeah, something about playing games on the Game Boy Advance, it just really clicks with me.
Yeah, it's that old nostalgia.
But I do have one that was originally not even a Game Boy Advance game, not even a Game Boy Color game, an original Game Boy game, and that is A Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening. So this is a very tightly packed can of worms that I'm not going to open because I could go talk about it from a speedrunning perspective. I set a world record in the remaster on Switch back in like 2020. I could think about it from one of my first ever gaming memories because I got Link's Awakening and Pokemon Yellow or Red with my original Game Boy Color back in 1998. And I played the crap out of it. I had a guidebook that had just all this information about Link's Awakening. So I had already beaten it start to finish like 50 times before the remake came out. And when that trailer dropped in a Nintendo Direct, I cried. I was so excited. Like, this has always been my number 2 game. This probably always will be my number 2 game unless something else has this many years and this many ways of getting into my subconscious and like ingraining itself as part of my DNA as a gamer. Is always going to stay up here. And I think I'm just going to leave it at that because if you want to know my full in-depth thoughts, we talk about it in speedrunning. We talk about it in our Zelda list. I'm sure I've mentioned it like 8 other times. So go check those out. Bring it home. What is your number 1?
Yeah, speaking of the Zelda lists, My favorite game of all time is The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. This is going to be your Spark Notes version because, like we said, we've got a top 10 list. We've got all types of lists. I think I've talked about Link to the Past 4 or 5 different episodes here. It's your childhood nostalgia game. It's the first game I ever remember beating. I think I had like 512 deaths because when you beat the game, it kind of shows that on the screen. I eventually got it down to 0. Mm-hmm. So, and it's Zelda game. You kind of choose your own difficulty. I did a 3-heart run. I've done deathless. Randomizers, all that kind of stuff.
Isn't that just the beauty of Zelda?
Yeah. But it's a Zelda game. It's good. It's really good.
It's really good.
It's really good. I've always liked, from more of a historical perspective, the fact that it has 2 worlds on the same cartridge, and just kind of the almost voodoo that they do to get that on there. It's very akin to like a Pokemon Silver.
I was going to say, as I'm looking at Pokemon Soul Silver on your list here as well.
Yeah, where they notoriously cleaned up enough space to just add Kanto in. Mm-hmm. But yeah, Link to the Past, great. You've got 2 different ways of playing it because you have your Super Nintendo, you have your GBA. I want to say 4 Swords Adventures, like the Link to the Past 4 Swords Adventures is on Switch now.
Very recently was added, yeah.
Yeah. And the Super Nintendo one's on there as well. There's no reason to not play this game just to test it out. Mm-hmm. But at the behest of not spending too long on it, we'll just move on to your number 1.
Which is Banjo-Kazooie. So this is one, again, I'm not going to ramble on and on about it because we could be here for a full episode just about Banjo-Kazooie. And essentially, what I love about this is just it was all the right things at the right time to make a kid fall in love and be like, this is the hobby that he wants to pursue for the rest of his life. Like, I had my Super Nintendo at this point, and I was playing Super Mario World. I had my Game Boy at this point, and I was playing Pokemon. I was playing Zelda. But something about Banjo-Kazooie just clicked on all cylinders. All of the parts of my brain melded together and were like, this is the best game I have played for me. I think when I look at like Link's Awakening, I'm like, that is a 10 out of 10 game. When I look at Mario World, that's a 10 out of 10 game. When I look at Banjo-Kazooie, it's like, it's beyond a 10 out of 10. It's just everything about it, every little nook and cranny I have explored. I have watched every single like retrospective review I've ever seen about it. I've gotten into the speedrunning aspect of it. And if it was ever to get re-released or remastered or something, that would be this like the next game I would actively pursue speedrunning in. And beyond that, I think just having the personalities of all the developers be so out there and open, and it's so easy to find them doing like interviews with YouTubers and podcasts and stuff. Like they're so transparent about the whole story of it that beyond just being a fantastic one-off gaming experience, it's just like transcended media, at least in my mind, to become just this sort of icon of gaming. And for a lot of people my age and who grew up in that transition from like Super to Nintendo 64, this is like our poster child, our banner for this is what games were like in the 90s. This is what we want. This is what we love.
Yeah, this is one of the games that we got when we got the N64 for Christmas. I think it was 99. It was this, the Star Wars Pod Racing, and Ocarina of Time. And like I put a lot of hours into Banjo-Kazooie.
Oh yeah.
On top of all the other ones, but
like it's at the point where I can 100% it in one sitting, not at like world record times with like glitches and stuff, but I have every level memorized to the point I can just pick it up, play through in one full sitting, just like Luigi's Mansion, just like Link's Awakening. So again, the common theme that you'll find is I love games that are just a good couple hour playthrough, and I will play them again and again. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I kind of these lists give us an inkling of who we are as gamers, right?
Absolutely.
So like you've got that. I've got open world, longer games, or platformers, or like top down, some type of like smart, like skill intensive games, right?
Mm-hmm. But there you have it. That is, both of us have now officially declared our top 10 games for the internet to see and scrutinize.
Yep.
So go ahead and scrutinize. Let us know what you agree with. Let us know what your top couple of games are.
And if we haven't played them, maybe we'll try them out one day.
Maybe we will.
But that's it. That's all. Everybody have a good night.
Thanks for listening.